The rejection was a cold, quiet thing. It didn't come with shouting or tears, but with the heavy silence that settled over the family dinner table on her 18th birthday. Lunaria had waited, as all in her lineage had, for the awakening, for the surge of primal power, the whisper of the second soul, the feral spirit of the wolf that should have risen to meet her own. But the night passed, and then a week, and then a month, and the silence in her soul remained unbroken. She was dormant, a dud, a fault in a bloodline that stretched back for centuries. Her parents, figures of stoic pride in their community, saw only shame. Their solution was swift and clinical. If she could not be the wolf she was meant to be, she would be forged into a weapon of a different kind. The military had a place for broken things, they reasoned. A special unit, they'd been told by a discreet recruiter who knew of their kind. A place that took in hybrids and anomalies, turning their unique traits into assets for king and country. Task Force 141. So Lunaria found herself traded from one form of rigid discipline to another. The air at the Hereford base was thick with the smell of wet asphalt, gun oil, and testosterone. It was a world of sharp angles, shouted orders, and the relentless, grinding routine of training. She was FNG Wolf, the new recruit whose file was a heavily redacted document that hinted at bio-special capabilities without ever naming them. To the hardened operators of 141, she was just another recruit to be broken down and rebuilt. Captain John Price, a man whose face was a roadmap of 100 conflicts, assessed her with eyes that missed nothing. John Soap McTavish offered a rare, cautious smile, while Kyle Gaz Garrick maintained a professional, unreadable distance. They were her handlers, her trainers, the architects of her new life. "Your file says you're special, kid. Let's see if you can prove it's in a way that's useful to us." Her training was a special kind of hell. They pushed her to the absolute limit of human endurance, unaware that the wellspring of power they sought was locked away inside her. Still, something lingered. Her senses were sharper, her instincts uncannily precise. She could track a man through dense woodland by the faintest scent of his sweat on the air, predict the motion of an opponent in CQC a split second before they moved. She explained it away as good observation skills, a lucky guess. They accepted it, but they watched her. And someone else watched too. From the shadows of the hangars, from the upper gantries of the kill house, a lone figure stood sentinel. He wore a mask patterned with the grinning visage of a human skull, and his eyes, visible through the dark sockets, held a chilling intensity. Lieutenant Simon "Ghost" Riley. He wasn't part of her training cadre. He rarely spoke to anyone, a phantom moving through the base, his presence a constant, low hum of danger. Lunaria felt his gaze like a physical touch. It didn't feel like the clinical assessment of Price or the curious prodding of Soap. It was something different, a quiet recognition, as if the ghost in him saw the dormant beast in her. She found herself tracking his movements, her head turning instinctively when he entered a room, her posture shifting to subtly place herself between him and any perceived threat, even in the relative safety of the base. It was a bizarre, primal impulse she couldn't explain. Their first real interaction was blessedly simple. She'd taken a hard fall during an obstacle course run, her knee torn open on unforgiving gravel. She was cleaning the wound herself in the deserted mess hall after hours, biting back a hiss of pain, when his shadow fell over her. He didn't speak. He simply took the antiseptic wipe and gauze from her trembling fingers. His own hands, clad in black tactical gloves, were surprisingly gentle as he cleaned and dressed the wound with practiced efficiency. She watched the skull mask, trying to read the unreadable. "Pain is a signal. Don't ignore it. Don't let it rule you either." His voice was a low, gravelly rasp, filtered slightly by the mask. He finished, packed away the small med kit he carried,
and was gone as silently as he had appeared. But the moment lingered. It was the first act of kindness, however gruff, she'd received since her exile, and it came from the most terrifying man on the base.
The bond began to form in those quiet, stolen moments. A nod across the firing range when she landed a perfect grouping. Him leaving a high-protein ration bar on her bunk after a particularly grueling day. Her leaving a fresh mug of hot tea by his station in the command center late at night, knowing he stood watch for hours on end. No words were needed. It was a language of gestures, of quiet understanding between two solitary creatures.
Soap noticed first, of course. His mohawk and cheerful demeanor belied a sharp, perceptive mind. "You're like his shadow, Wolf. Never seen the old ghost let anyone get that close."
I don't know what you mean.
You do. It's like watching a guard dog pick his person. He's yours, and you're his. Just be careful. He's got more ghosts haunting him than just the one on his mask.
The word stuck with her. Guard dog. It felt right. She felt a fierce, burning protectiveness for the silent man in the skull mask. It was the closest she'd ever come to the loyalty her wolf was supposed to embody.
6 months into her service, the call came. An extraction mission in Urzikstan. A high-value asset had been compromised, and 141 was being sent to pull them out of a city teeming with Al-Qatala forces. It was Lunaria's first proper deployment. The operation devolved into chaos almost immediately. The intelligence was bad. The HVA was bait, and the extraction point was a kill box. RPGs slammed into their vehicles, and the night erupted into a maelstrom of tracer fire and screaming metal. "Compromised! All call signs! Fall back to Rally Point Zulu! We're bugging out!"
They were pinned down in a crumbling marketplace, dust and cordite choking the air. Lunaria moved with a desperate grace, her senses, already sharp, ratcheted to a razor's edge. She felt the sniper on the rooftop before she saw him, a flicker of movement, a glint of glass.
"Sniper! 3 o'clock, rooftop!" Ghost was already moving, laying down suppressive fire to cover gas, but he was exposed for a fraction of a second too long. The sniper's round, a heavy .338 Lapua, was brutally effective. It punched through the ceramic plate in his carrier, the sickening thud audible even over the gunfire. Ghost staggered, a dark stain blossoming on his chest, and fell behind the ruined shell of a market stall. Something inside Lunaria snapped. It wasn't a thought. It wasn't a decision. It was an ancient, tectonic shift in the foundation of her soul. The silence that had haunted her for years was shattered by a deafening, savage howl. Pain, white-hot and blinding, lanced through every cell of her body. Her bones felt like they were twisting, her muscles coiling and knotting into new, impossible shapes. A guttural growl ripped from her throat, a sound that was not human. She dropped her rifle, her hands curling into claws, nails thickening and sharpening. Through the red haze of her vision, she saw Soap staring at her, his face a mask of disbelief and horror. Her eyes, he would later say, were glowing with a fierce amber light. "Wolf? What in the bloody hell?" She didn't answer. She couldn't. The world had narrowed to a single, burning imperative. Protect him. The man on the ground. Her anchor. Her Alpha. She moved. The word was insufficient. She exploded from cover, a blur of motion that defied human speed. She ran on all fours, her body low to the ground, the broken paving stones cracking under the unnatural force of her strides. The enemy combatants who turned their weapons on her were met with a primal fury they could not comprehend. She was a whirlwind of claws and teeth, a phantom of vengeance. She didn't just neutralize threats, she dismantled them with terrifying efficiency. She reached the sniper's building and scaled the wall, finding purchase where none should exist. She burst onto the rooftop like an avenging spirit. The sniper had time for one wide-eyed gasp before she was upon him. The fight was over before it began. Then, as quickly as it came, the red rage began to recede, leaving an agonizing ache in its wake. She scrambled back down to the street, her movements becoming more human, more clumsy. She collapsed beside Ghost, her transformation receding, leaving her shivering and gasping in her torn fatigues. She put her hand on his chest, feeling the ragged beat of his heart beneath her palm, and stood guard over his body, a low, warning growl rumbling in her chest at anyone who approached. When Soap and Gas finally reached them, they found her crouched over Ghost's still form, her eyes still holding a faint amber glow, her expression feral and protective. She only relaxed when she saw Soap's medic patch and let him work. The debrief back at base was tense. Price paced his office, the cigar in his hand long extinguished. Your file said dormant. It failed to mention what happens when it wakes up. I didn't know, sir. I swear. It never happened before. It happened tonight. You saved my men. You also tore 3 enemy combatants to pieces with your bare hands. This complicates things, Lunaria. Complicates things. That was the understatement of the century. She was a monster, a freak. The very thing her parents had feared she wasn't, she now was. She expected discharge, a black bag over her head, a life in a secret lab. Instead, Price just sighed, rubbing his temples. Ghost is stable. The plate caught the worst of it, but he's got broken ribs and a punctured lung. He's asking for you. The med bay was sterile and quiet. Ghost was propped up on a bed, monitors beeping a steady rhythm beside him. He wasn't wearing his mask. It was the first time she'd seen his face. He had tired, haunted blue eyes and scars that told their own violent stories. He looked at her, and for the first time, she saw something other than a ghost in his eyes. She saw Simon. Soap told me what you did. I lost control. No, you aimed it. You aimed it at them to protect me. There's a difference. He reached out, his hand finding hers. His touch was warm, real. It grounded the chaotic energy still thrumming under her skin. That thing inside you, the wolf, I know what it's like. To have something like that in your head, a ghost, a beast. It doesn't have to control you, but you have to stop fighting it. From that day on, their dynamic shifted. Ghost, once he recovered, became her unofficial trainer. Not in the kill house or on the range, but in secluded parts of the base, far from prying eyes. He taught her control. He wasn't afraid of her, not even when her eyes bled to gold and a growl vibrated in her chest. He would stand his ground, his voice a low, steady anchor in the storm of her senses. Focus on my voice, Lunaria. Breathe. Feel the ground under your feet. You are in control. Tell the wolf where to look. He taught her how to tap into the wolf's senses without losing herself, to track by scent on a molecular level, to hear a heartbeat through a concrete wall, to move with a silence that rivaled his own. In return, she gave him a piece of herself she'd never given anyone. She let him see past the soldier, past the wolf, to the lonely girl who had been cast out. She was his weapon, yes, but she was also his confidant, his shadow, his dog. The romance between them wasn't one of poetry or grand gestures. It was forged in the quiet moments. In the way he would adjust her gear before a mission, his gloved fingers lingering for a moment on her shoulder. In the way she would sit watch outside his door on nights when his nightmares were bad, a silent, steadfast guardian. It was in a shared look across a briefing room that said more than 1,000 words. I have your back, always. Their ultimate test came during Operation Cerberus. Intel pointed to a hidden chemical weapons lab in the mountains of Verdask, run by a rogue ultranationalist general who had taken an interest in the 141's special asset. He knew about her. The infiltration was smooth, a textbook 141 operation. But the lab was a trap. Not for the whole team, but for her. A high-frequency emitter activated, a piercing shriek that bypassed human hearing and struck directly at the primal part of her brain. It was agony. The wolf roared to the surface, not in a controlled surge, but in a blind panic. The lab doors slammed shut, sealing her and Ghost inside as nerve gas began to hiss from the vents. Doors are sealed, magnetic locks, we can't breach. Lunaria thrashed, clawing at her own head, the sound threatening to shatter her sanity. The wolf wanted out, wanted to destroy everything, including herself, to make the noise stop. "Lunaria, look at me! Simon! Look at Simon!" He grabbed her, forcing her to look at him. He'd pulled off his mask. His face was stark in the flashing red emergency lights. The gas was swirling around their feet. They had minutes, maybe less. The sound is the cage. The wolf is the key. Let it out. But you hold the leash. Aim it at that door. Aim it for me. For us. His voice cut through the pain. Her anchor. She squeezed her eyes shut, took a shuddering breath, and did the one thing she'd been taught her whole life to fear. She let go. The transformation was complete and terrible. Fur, short and dark, sprouted along her arms and neck. Her face elongated, her teeth sharpening into fangs. She was a nightmare of sinew and muscle, a perfect killing machine. But through the feral amber eyes, she still saw Simon. Her Simon. She turned to the reinforced steel door. With a roar that shook the entire facility, she slammed into it. Once. Twice. The metal groaned, dented, then tore apart like wet paper. She ripped the door from its hinges and hurled it down the corridor. Price and the team stood there, stunned into silence. She stood in the doorway, chest heaving, the monstrous form slowly receding back into the familiar shape of the young woman they knew. She stumbled, and Ghost was there to catch her, pulling his rebreather over her mouth and his own. Later, on the exfil chopper, the roar of the rotors filled the silence. The mission was a success. The lab was destroyed. She sat huddled in a blanket, shivering, the aftershocks of the transformation still rattling her bones. Ghost sat beside her, his masked presence a solid wall of comfort. He reached over and placed his hand over hers. He didn't let go for the entire flight home. She was not broken. She was not a fault. She was a wolf, and she had found her pack. And in the quiet, lethal presence of the man beside her, she had found her alpha. She was Task Force 141's guard dog. She was Simon's guardian. And for the first time in her life, she was finally home. The flight back was a cocoon of noise and vibration, insulating them from the reality of what had just happened. But the moment the chopper's skids hit the tarmac at Hereford, the silence that fell inside the cabin was more deafening than any rotor wash. The ramp lowered, flooding the interior with the flat gray light of an English dawn. Price was the first one out, his face unreadable. He barked orders for Soap and Gaz to oversee the ordnance offload and post-op checks, his tone leaving no room for argument or question. "Lunaria. Ghost. My office now." It wasn't a request. She followed, acutely aware of Ghost's presence at her back, a solid, unwavering shield. Every eye on the tarmac seemed to follow her, a mixture of awe, fear, and morbid curiosity. She was no longer just FNG Wolf. She was something other, something to be wary of. The walk to the command building felt longer than the entire mission. Price's office was a small, cluttered space that smelled of stale cigar smoke and old paper. He didn't sit, instead moving to stand before the large monitor on the wall. With a few keystrokes, a secure channel opened, and the face of Station Chief Kate Laswell filled the screen. Her expression was sharp, analytical, giving nothing away. Captain, report. Mission was a success. Lab destroyed, intel secured. Complications on the ground, however. We were fed bad intel. The target was Wolf. Laswell's eyes flicked to Lunaria, a brief, dispassionate scan. It was the same look a mechanic might give a faulty engine. Lunaria felt her shoulders tense, the urge to shrink away warring with the defiance that Ghost's proximity inspired. Her file mentioned a dormant anomaly. The field report from Sergeant McTavish suggests it's active and effective. Can you control it? The question was directed at Price, but its weight fell entirely on Lunaria. Can you control it? Like a dog, like a weapon. Her jaw tightened. I can. Her voice was quiet but firm. Laswell's eyebrow rose a fraction of a millimeter. Ghost shifted his weight beside her, a minute sound of leather and nylon that spoke volumes. It said, "I'm here." Price finally turned, his gaze heavy. She saved my team, Kate. She saved the mission. Her control is a work in progress, but her loyalty is not. She follows my orders. That's good to hear. The asset's performance parameters have exceeded all projections. High Command will be pleased. New operational protocols for her will be forthcoming. Get your team debriefed and squared away. Laswell out. The screen went black. The word hung in the air. Asset. A cold, sterile term that stripped her of all humanity. All the progress, all the feeling of finding a home evaporated in an instant, leaving behind the familiar chill of being a problem to be managed. She stared at the blank monitor, seeing her own monstrous reflection in it.
Don't pay her any mind, lad. She's a politician in a soldier's uniform. All she sees are pieces on a chessboard.
His voice was softer now, tired. He finally sat down, looking older than he had a few hours ago. Go, get checked out by the medic, both of you. That's an order. And Lunaria, good work tonight. The praise felt hollow, disconnected from the turmoil churning inside her. Ghost placed a gloved hand on the small of her back, a firm, guiding pressure that steered her out of the office and down the sterile hallway toward the med bay. The base was waking up around them, but they moved in their own bubble of silence. The medic, a young corporal named Ames, tried his best to be professional. He dutifully checked Ghost's patched-up torso, changing the dressing with practiced hands. But when he turned to Lunaria, his movements became hesitant. His eyes kept flicking to her hands, her jawline, as if expecting her to sprout fangs. She had a few scrapes and a deep bruise forming on her shoulder where she'd hit the wall, but she knew that wasn't what he was looking for. He was looking for the monster. "We're done here. Leave the kit." His voice cut through the tension. Ames practically scrambled to obey, leaving a tray of medical supplies on the counter before making a hasty exit. Ghost shut the door behind him and turned back to her. He picked up a fresh antiseptic wipe, his movements deliberate. He gently took her arm, turning it over to examine a long, shallow cut on her forearm she hadn't even noticed. She watched his unmasked face as he worked. The harsh medical lights carved new shadows into the scarred landscape of his features. He was focused entirely on his task, his touch a strange combination of clinical efficiency and profound gentleness. The chaos in her mind began to quiet, soothed by the simple, grounding act of him caring for her. "They're afraid of me." Good. Fear keeps people at a distance, keeps them from getting you killed. "That's not what I mean. I'm afraid of me, Simon." She whispered his name for the first time, and it felt both foreign and intimately familiar. He paused, his thumb resting against her pulse point. His haunted blue eyes lifted to meet hers. "I know. I was there. I saw it all." It was just rage, noise and pain and teeth. If you hadn't been there, if your voice hadn't, I think I would have just disappeared into it.
But you didn't. He finished cleaning the cut and applied a sterile bandage, his fingers lingering on her skin. He looked at her, and the ghost was gone again. It was just Simon, a man who understood darkness better than anyone. Everyone has a monster, Lunaria. Some of us just have to feed it more often. The trick isn't starving it, it's teaching it who to bite. He led her not to her own sterile barracks room, but to his. It was just as sparse, but it felt different, safer. He pointed her toward the small, functional shower. Clean up. Get the blood and the stench of the mission off you. Then sleep. When she emerged, wrapped in a towel, feeling slightly more human, she found him sitting on the edge of his cot, cleaning his sidearm with meticulous care. He'd laid out a clean t-shirt and a pair of fatigues for her. She dressed in silence, the borrowed clothes smelling faintly of gun oil, soap, and him. It was comforting. She hesitated, unsure of the protocol for this strange new territory. The bed's yours. I'll take the floor. No. Stay. The word was out before she could stop it. It sounded small, vulnerable. He looked at her, his expression unreadable for a long moment. Then he gave a slow, deliberate nod. He stripped off his own tactical shirt, leaving him in a plain black t-shirt that did little to hide the powerful muscles of his chest and arms, or the ladderwork of old scars that crisscrossed his skin. He lay down on top of the covers on the far side of the narrow bed, his back to her, a silent, imposing mountain range between her and the world. Sleep did not come easily, but for the first time in her life, the silence in her soul was not empty. It was filled with the quiet, steady sound of his breathing beside her. A low, constant rhythm that told her she was not alone with her monster. The days that followed settled into a strange new rhythm. The whispers and stares around the base didn't vanish, but they changed. Fear was replaced by a grudging respect, especially after Price made it clear in his usual blunt manner that Lunaria was a member of 141, and any issues with that could be brought directly to him. No one took him up on the offer. Soap, true to form, broke the remaining tension with a joke. He plopped down across from her in the mess hall, eyeing the steak on her plate. So I'm guessing fetch is out of the question, 'cause Gaz owes me 20 quid, and I bet you could catch a frisbee at 100 yards. Lunaria stared at him. Then a slow, genuine smile spread across her face. It felt rusty, unused. Only if you throw it, McTavish. Soap's grin was infectious. It was his way of saying, "You're still you. You're still one of us." Gaz was more reserved, but his acceptance came in a different form. During a CQC training session, he came at her with a new intensity, no longer pulling his punches. He treated her not as a fragile rookie, but as a dangerous and respected equal. When she put him on his back using a move that was a little too fast, a little too predatory, he just tapped out and nodded. "All right, Wolf, point taken." Her most significant training, however, happened far from the rest of the team. Ghost took her to a disused section of the base, an old concrete bunker that absorbed sound and hid them from view. Here, he began to teach her. It wasn't about fighting, it was about control. "Close your eyes. What do you hear?" She stood in the center of the bunker, focusing, trying to push past the normal sounds of the base. The wind, a Jeep driving half a click away, Price yelling at Soap about some paperwork. Listen deeper. Don't just hear. Let the wolf hear. Let it sort the sounds for you. It knows what a threat sounds like. She took a breath and sank into that wild place inside her. It was easier now, less of a terrifying abyss and more of a familiar darkness. She didn't let go. She just opened a door. The world exploded. The sound of the Jeep became the crunch of individual tires on gravel. She could hear the frantic beat of a bird's heart in the rafters above, the low hum of the base's main generator, the quiet rasp of Ghost's gear as he shifted his stance 10 meters away. She could hear his heartbeat, slow and steady. "I can hear your heart." There was a pause. Good.
Now find a threat. Filter out the rest. It was exhausting, like learning a new language. He taught her to pull on the wolf's senses without letting the rage take over, to borrow its speed for a single step, its strength for a single blow. Their sparring sessions became a blur of motion. It was no longer a fight, but a dialogue of violence. He was the only person who could keep up with her, whose instincts were as sharp as her own. He'd block a blow she hadn't even consciously decided to throw, his movements economical and precise against her fluid, predatory grace. During a break, they sat against the cold concrete wall, sharing a canteen. He watched her, his head tilted slightly. "You're not fighting it anymore." "You told me not to. You said to aim it." "I did, but you're the one who pulled the trigger. You're stronger than you think, Lunaria. Not just the wolf, you." He reached out, his gloved thumb brushing away a smudge of dirt on her cheek. The gesture was brief, almost imperceptible, but it sent a jolt through her that had nothing to do with adrenaline or primal instinct. It was something far more dangerous and far more human. Their new routine was shattered 2 weeks later. The call came at 0400. The briefing room was cold, the only light coming from the projector screen displaying a satellite image of a snow-covered complex. "Right. Listen up. The intel we pulled from the Verdansk lab has borne fruit. Our target from Operation Cerberus has a name: General Dmitry Volkov. Disgraced Spetsnaz, cut loose for running unsanctioned experiments on his own men. Turns out his interests lie in esoteric genetics." Price's eyes flicked to Lunaria. The room went very still. On the screen, a file photo of a severe-looking man with cold, dead eyes appeared. Volkov was the architect of a black project codenamed Lycan, an attempt to create the perfect soldier by splicing animal DNA into the human genome. The project was deemed a failure, all assets supposedly terminated. Apparently, not all of them. Laswell's voice came from the comm speaker, cold and clear. Lunaria stared at the screen, her blood running cold. Lycan. The name was a punch to the gut. The pieces of her life, the strange instincts, the dormant power, her family's shame, slammed together into a horrifying picture. She wasn't just a fluke of her bloodline. She was an experiment. Intel suggests Volkov has established a new facility in a decommissioned Soviet listening post in Siberia. He's trying to restart his work. Worse, we have chatter that he has another asset on site, one he managed to keep when the program was shut down. Another one. The thought was staggering. She wasn't alone. So he's building a kennel. What's the mission, Cap? Simple and clean. We go in quiet. We get our hands on Volkov's research, neutralize him, and deal with the second asset. Define deal with. Price looked at Laswell's name on the speaker, then back at his team. His jaw was set. Official orders are to assess and neutralize if hostile. My orders are that we bring them home. One of our own if we can. The implication was clear. This was now a rescue mission. Lunaria felt a fierce surge of protectiveness for this stranger, this person who was like her. Ghost, who had been silent throughout the briefing, finally spoke. "He's baiting her. Volkov knew we were coming in Verdansk. He'll be expecting her in Siberia. He'll have prepared another trap." "I know. That's why you're with her every step of the way. You're her shadow. Keep her leashed." "I don't need a leash." "No. You need an anchor. There's a difference." His words silenced the room. He was looking at her, and his gaze was a promise. "I won't let you get lost." The gearing up process was a quiet, focused ritual. The air in the hangar was frigid, drafts of wind cutting through the heated space. Lunaria methodically checked her magazines, her movements precise and automatic. Her mind, however, was a whirlwind. Volkov, Lycan, another asset. It was too much. A pair of gloved hands entered her field of vision, taking the plate carrier from her and settling it over her shoulders. Ghost. He moved around her, checking the straps, pulling them tight, his movements efficient and familiar. It was their ritual, but this time it felt different, more charged. His hands paused on her shoulders. "This is not your fault, Lunaria. This is not on you. He made me. This thing inside me. He's the reason my family threw me away. It's all because of him. This is personal, Simon." Every mission is personal. That's what makes us good at this. But don't let the anger blind you. It's a tool, not a fuel. You burn too hot, you'll burn out. Understand? She nodded, the lump in her throat too thick to speak. He squeezed her shoulder once, a firm, reassuring pressure. Whatever we find in there, whatever he's done, we face it together. We get the research, we get the asset, and we get out. And if Volkov is there, he's mine. There was a possessive, deadly coldness in his voice that made the hairs on her arms stand up. He wasn't just protecting his teammate, he was protecting his own. He's hunting one of his monsters. Let's show him what happens when one of them hunts back. He looked at her, and she could feel the grim satisfaction in his gaze, even through the mask. He handed her a modified rifle, its scope a newer, more advanced thermal model. "Your eyes are better, but this will help the rest of us keep up." As they walked toward the transport plane, its engines whining in the dark, she felt the cold Siberian air before they ever left the ground. But for the first time, she wasn't facing the cold alone. The pack was going on a hunt. The C-130 Hercules was a hollow metal tube of noise and freezing air, roaring through the blackness over the Barents Sea. Inside, Task Force 141 was an island of grim quiet. They sat strapped into the red webbing seats, the green glow of the cabin lights painting their faces in sickly hues. Soap was sharpening his favorite knife, the rhythmic scrape of steel on stone a familiar mantra. Gaz was methodically field stripping his rifle for the third time, his hands moving with the grace of a surgeon. Price simply sat, eyes closed, seemingly asleep but for the subtle tension in his jaw. He was a coiled spring. Lunaria sat across from him, next to Ghost. She felt the vibration of the engines in her bones, a deep thrumming that resonated with the unsettled energy buzzing under her skin. Siberia, Volkov. The words were a brand on her mind. She wasn't just going to a location, she was going to her genesis. The thought was nauseating. She stared down at her own hands, half expecting them to change, to twist into the claws she'd seen in Verdansk. They remained stubbornly human, yet they felt alien to her. She felt a pressure against her knee. Ghost hadn't moved, but he'd shifted just enough that his leg was braced firmly against hers. It wasn't an accident. It was a deliberate, grounding touch, an anchor in the turbulent air and the storm in her head. She risked a glance at him. He was staring straight ahead, the skull mask impassive, but she could feel his attention on her, as palpable as the contact point between them. She took a slow, deep breath, matching its rhythm to the steady pressure against her leg. The buzzing in her blood began to subside. "So, what's the plan if this other fella is, less lonely puppy and more rabid wolf?" Soap's voice cut through the drone of the engines, directed at Price, but his eyes were on Lunaria. He was testing the waters, trying to gauge her reaction. It was his way. "We use our judgment, Sergeant. First, we try to talk it down. If that fails, we use tranks. Lethal force is an absolute last resort. He's a victim, same as Wolf. We don't leave our people behind." The words "same as Wolf" and "our people" struck a chord deep inside her. Price wasn't looking at her, but the message was clear. You are one of us. We are coming for one of us. It was a shield against the cold dread seeping into her. Volkov will be counting on a reaction from her. He'll want a spectacle. Then we disappoint him. We go in quiet. "Ghost, you're on point with Wolf. Your call on the ground. Get us in. Soap, Gaz, you're with me. We secure the data, plant the charges, and get out. Radio silence until we link up at the objective or the mission is compromised. The jump light turned red. The time for talk was over. The ramp lowered, revealing a howling vortex of black wind and ice crystals. The code was a physical blow. They stood, hooked their static lines, and moved toward the abyss. Ghost was directly in front of her. He turned his head slightly, his eyes and the mask meeting hers for a fraction of a second. A silent check-in. Ready? She gave a sharp, single nod. Always. Then he was gone, a dark shape swallowed by the night. One by one, the others followed. She took a step, and the wind snatched her, pulling her into the frozen, screaming dark. The landing was a brutal impact in waist-deep powder snow. For a moment, she was completely submerged in a world of suffocating white and silence. She burst upwards, gasping, the air so cold it felt like swallowing glass. Her parachute was already collapsing behind her. Through the swirling snow, she saw 4 other dark shapes materialize, moving with practiced efficiency to bury their chutes and consolidate their gear. Ghost was at her side in an instant, his hand briefly touching her shoulder to ensure she was solid. They were on a wind-swept ridge, overlooking a vast, dark forest. The listening post was a ghost on the horizon, a series of skeletal comms towers and concrete domes barely visible against the star-dusted sky. The wind howled, a lonely, predatory sound. It should have felt alien, but to the wolf inside her, it felt like a welcome. Comms check. All stations, report. Bravo 6, solid. Bravo 5, solid. Watcher, solid. It took her a second to realize Watcher was her new call sign. It was fitting. Watcher 2, solid. Good. Ghost, you have the lead. We'll follow your trail. Move. Ghost gave a single nod and set off, not down the ridge, but along it. Lunaria fell into step beside him. He moved with an impossible lightness, his feet barely seeming to disturb the deep snow. She found the rhythm easily, her body adapting to the terrain, the cold sharpening her senses instead of dulling them. She let the wolf's senses bleed into her own, opening that inner door just a crack. The world shifted. The wind was no longer just a sound, it was a tapestry of information. It carried the scent of pine, of frozen earth, of ozone, and something else. Faint but sharp. Antiseptic, ozone, and the coppery tang of old blood. There's a perimeter, not electronic, patrols, 2-man teams. I can smell their tracks. They passed this way less than an hour ago. There's a blind spot in their route, to the northeast, where the rocks break the wind. She spoke in a low voice, for Ghost's ears only. He didn't question her. He simply altered his course, leading them toward the spot she'd indicated. Price and the others followed without a word, their trust absolute. They moved for nearly 2 hours, a silent procession of ghosts in the white landscape, until they reached the outer fence of the facility. It was a relic of the Cold War, a place built to endure Armageddon. Concrete walls were topped with layers of rusted razor wire. Cameras, modern and thermal-capable, swept methodical arcs. Ghost pulled out his binoculars, scanning the compound. Lunaria didn't need them. 2 guards on the main gate, 4 more patrolling the wall. Snipers on 2 of the towers. They're not watching the forest, they're watching the inside of the compound. They're prison guards, not sentries. They're more afraid of what's in there than what's out here. Good, let's use that. There's a ventilation shaft on the western wall. Low profile, probably leads to the generator room. Minimal guard traffic. Sounds like our door. Get it open. Reaching the wall was the easy part. They moved like shadows, using the swirling snow as cover. The vent was covered by a heavy iron grate, bolted directly into the concrete. While Gaz used a thermal lance to carefully slice through the bolts, Lunaria kept watch, her senses stretched taut. She heard the crunch of a boot in the snow 100 meters away and gave a low hand signal. The team froze, melting into the shadows of the wall. A two-man patrol passed by, their conversation about ration packs and cheap vodka carried to her on the wind. They didn't even glance in their direction. Once they were gone, Gaz finished his work. The grate came away with a low groan. The air that wafted out of the vent was stale and cold, thick with the smell of diesel and something else, something acrid and vaguely biological, like a Vivexin lab. The smell made the wolf in her recoil, a low growl rumbling in her chest. Ghost placed a hand on her shoulder, a silent command to stay calm. "I'm going first. Watcher, you're right behind me. Price, we'll secure the entry and signal for you. 3 clicks." Ghost slid into the darkness without a sound. Lunaria followed, crawling into the tight, claustrophobic space. The darkness was absolute, but for her it was as clear as day. She could see the heat signature of Ghost's body ahead of her, the fainter outlines of pipes and electrical conduits lining the shaft. They moved for what felt like an eternity before dropping into the generator room. It was a cavernous space, dominated by 2 massive diesel generators that provided the facility's power. They were offline, the room running on auxiliary power, casting long, dancing shadows. 2 technicians in lab coats were on a gantry above, focused on a sparking control panel. Ghost dispatched the first with a silenced pistol shot. The second turned, his mouth opening to shout, but a thrown knife from Ghost buried itself in his throat, cutting the sound off. The bodies crumpled to the gantry floor, unseen. Ghost keyed his comms. 3 sharp clicks. Moments later, the rest of the team dropped into the room they were in. "Right, let's go to work. Schematics show the main lab and data core are sub-level 2. The holding cells are in a separate wing, sub-level 3. Gaz, with me. Soap, you've got our 6. Ghost, Lunaria, find our friend. Rendezvous at the data core in 30 minutes. If you're not there, we come looking." The team split. Price's group melted into one corridor, while Ghost led Lunaria down another. The hallways were sterile, white, and brutally utilitarian. The only sounds were the hum of the lights and the distant, rhythmic clang of metal on metal. The chemical smell grew stronger, burning her sinuses. As they descended deeper into the facility, the walls became grimier. Scorch marks marred the concrete, and long, deep gouges were carved into the steel doors, as if a great beast had tried to claw its way out. They found the first lab. The door was ajar. Inside was a scene from a nightmare. Operating tables stained with old blood. Cages, large enough to hold a man, were empty, their doors bent and broken. Glass vats were filled with murky, formaldehyde-like fluid, containing grotesque failures. Malformed limbs, twisted spines, things that were not quite human and not quite animal. On a monitor, a video file was left on a loop. It showed a figure strapped to a table, writhing in agony as scientists in hazmat suits injected him with a glowing green serum. The man screamed, and his body began to contort, his bones snapping and reforming. Lunaria felt a wave of vertigo. Her own genesis might have looked just like this. This wasn't science, it was torture. It was desecration. A hot, furious rage began to boil in her gut, the wolf snarling to be let out, to tear this place and its creators apart. Her vision began to tint red at the edges. Lunaria, breathe. This is what he wants, to throw you off balance. Don't give him the satisfaction. This is history. We're here to change the future. His voice was a lifeline. She focused on it, on the solid weight of his hand that had once again found her shoulder. She closed her eyes, took a ragged breath, and pushed the rage down. When she opened them, the red was gone. She looked at Ghost, her expression hard as flint. "Let's find him. Let's get him out of here." They continued down to sub-level 3. The rhythmic clanging was louder now. This level was clearly a prison. The doors were heavier,
reinforced with thick steel bars over small observation windows. Most were empty. But as they approached the end of the corridor, the scent hit her. It was the smell of another wolf. Musk, fur, blood, and a deep, soul-crushing despair. The clanging was coming from the last cell on the left. The door was dented outwards, as if something had been trying to punch its way through. Ghost held up a hand, signaling for a halt. He peered through the small, grimy window on the door. Lunaria strained her ears. She could hear harsh, ragged breathing from within, and a low, guttural whimpering that was pure animal agony. Ghost stepped back from the door, his posture tense.
He's in there. He's big. And he's hurt.
Suddenly, a voice echoed through the corridor, smooth, calm, and laced with condescending amusement. It came from hidden speakers in the ceiling.
Ah, Lycan 01, you've arrived. I must say, you've exceeded all my expectations. Task Force 141, a curious choice of pack, but effective, I'll grant you. A shame you had to see my earlier, cruder work. Think of it as the necessary charcoal sketches before the final masterpiece. Before you.
Ghost immediately raised his rifle, scanning the ceiling for the speakers, his body shielding Lunaria's. Lunaria's blood ran cold. That voice, the creator, the monster behind the curtain. Volkov. In the flesh, or on the comms at least. I'm afraid I have a prior engagement, but I couldn't resist observing the family reunion. I am, in a way, your father, and you are about to meet your brother, Lycan 02. He is less stable than you, more prone to base instinct. A failed prototype, you might say. But he still has his uses. Do be a dear and put him out of his misery, won't you? Tidy up my mistakes. With a loud hiss of hydraulics, the lock on the cell door disengaged. Red emergency lights began to flash, casting the corridor in a hellish crimson glow. The heavy steel door slowly swung inwards.
It's a trap. He wants us to fight. Lunaria, stay back.
But she couldn't. She was frozen, her eyes locked on the darkness within the cell. A shape emerged, unfolding itself from the shadows. It was massive, far larger than her own transformed state. A man, or what was left of one, hunched over, his body a twisted landscape of scar tissue, muscle, and patches of coarse gray fur. His face was a feral, snarling mask, his eyes glowing with a feverish, pain-maddened yellow light. One of his arms was trapped in a crude iron manacle, chained to the wall, the source of the clanging. He pulled against it, roaring in frustration and pain. He saw them, and his roar turned into a focused, hateful snarl. He wasn't seeing soldiers, he was seeing more scientists. More pain. He lunged, the chain snapping taut with a sound like a gunshot. It held, but just barely. He was a caged animal, desperate and furious. Ghost had his rifle up, aimed at the creature's chest, but he didn't fire.
No, don't shoot. He's not an enemy. He's a prisoner.
She took a step forward, ignoring Ghost's hissed warning. She held her hands up, palms open, a universal sign of peace that felt absurd in this situation. She focused on the man, the prisoner, not the beast.
We're not with him. We're not your enemy. We're here to get you out.
The creature, Lycan 02, paused his struggles. He tilted his head, a flicker of something other than rage in his glowing eyes. Confusion? He snarled, a low, uncertain sound. He could smell her. He could sense the kinship, the shared pain, the thing that made them the same. Touching, but naive. You see, 01, the flaw in 02 wasn't in his strength, but in his triggers. He's been conditioned,
Allow me to demonstrate. A high-frequency tone, nearly inaudible but razor-sharp, pierced the air. It was the same sound from the Verdansk grab, but stronger, more refined. It sliced directly into Lunaria's mind, a spike of pure agony. She cried out, stumbling back, clutching her head. The wolf inside her howled, thrashing against her control. But the effect on Lycan O2 was 1,000 times worse. He screamed, a sound of pure, unadulterated torment, and began to slam his body against the wall, against the chain, his only instinct to make the noise stop. The iron manacle groaned, the bolts securing it to the wall beginning to tear free from the concrete. "The emitter! We have to stop the sound!" But before he could act, the bolts gave way. With a shriek of tearing metal, Lycan O2 was free. The manacle and a length of chain still dangled from his wrist, a brutal flail. He was no longer confused, he was only pain. And he charged, a blur of gray fur and fury, directly at the source of his agony, directly at Lunaria. Ghost shoved her aside, opening fire with his rifle. The bullets struck the creature's chest and shoulder, staggering him, but they didn't stop him. He roared, swiping with his free hand, the claws catching Ghost's rifle and sending it spinning away. He swung the chained manacle, and it slammed into Ghost's side with sickening force. Ghost grunted in pain, thrown back against the corridor wall, slumping to the ground, momentarily stunned. Seeing Simon fall broke the dam. The agony from the emitter, the rage at Volkov, the desperate need to protect her anchor, it all coalesced. Lunaria didn't fight the transformation. She welcomed it. She let go. Pain, exquisite and cleansing, tore through her. She fell to her knees as her bones reshaped, fur sprouting along her limbs. She rose, no longer Lunaria, but the wolf. She was smaller, leaner than the gray beast before her, but she was faster, and her fury was controlled. It was aimed. She met his charge with her own. It wasn't a fight of soldiers, it was a battle of apex predators. They collided in a flurry of claws and teeth. He had brute strength, she had speed and precision. She ducked under a wild swing, her claws tearing furrows in his side. He backhanded her, sending her skidding across the floor. But she was up in an instant, circling, her amber eyes locked on his. The emitter sound was a torment, but the fight was a focus. A dialogue of violence she understood perfectly. She wasn't trying to kill him. She was trying to subdue him, to show dominance. This was a pack fight, a challenge for status. She saw her opening as he lunged again, overcommitting. She dropped low, shot forward, and clamped her jaws around his leg, just above the knee. She bit down, not to sever, but to cripple. He howled, his leg buckling, and he crashed to the floor. She was on him in a second, one clawed hand on his throat, pinning him, her fangs bared inches from his face. She let out a low, guttural growl that was not a threat, but a statement. Yield. I am Alpha. The pain-maddened yellow in his eyes flickered. The rage began to recede, replaced by exhaustion and a dawning understanding. He stopped struggling. He looked at her, at the controlled power in her form, and he let out a low whimper. He yielded. As if on cue, the high-frequency sound cut out. In the sudden silence, the only sound was their ragged, panting breaths. The red emergency lights switched back to the sterile white of the corridor. Fascinating. Utterly fascinating. You establish dominance. You have true alpha instincts, O1. My crowning achievement. Lunaria slowly released him, the transformation receding, leaving her trembling in her torn fatigues. The other wolf lay on the floor, breathing heavily, his own form slowly shrinking back towards something more human. She ignored Volkov's voice. She scrambled over to Ghost, who was pushing himself up, clutching his side. His mask was askew, and she could see a grimace of pain on his lips.
Simon, are you all right? He broke your ribs. I'll live. Healed worse. Good work, Wolf. You held the leash.
Price's voice crackled over the comms, urgent and loud. Ghost! Wolf! We've got the data, but Volkov just triggered a self-destruct sequence. We've got 10 minutes to get out of this bloody icebox. Get to the data core, now! An alarm began to blare, a loud whooping sound that echoed the flashing red lights that had returned. Ghost pushed himself to his feet, pulling a tranq pistol from his thigh rig. He looked at the other man, who was now mostly human again, curled on the floor, naked and shivering, covered in blood and grime.
We're not leaving him. He injected the tranq into the man's shoulder. The man's eyes fluttered and closed. Ghost then looked at Lunaria, his gaze intense.
Volkov is in the main control room, overlooking the data core. Price is holding him there. He's mine. No, he's ours. They helped each other lift the unconscious man, Ghost taking most of the weight despite his injuries, and began to move as fast as they could through the corridors, heading for the heart of the facility. The building was shaking around them, dust and chunks of concrete falling from the ceiling. The data core was a massive, cylindrical room, 2 stories high, filled with humming server racks. Price, Soap, and Gaz were providing suppressive fire towards a reinforced glass observation room on the upper level. Inside, they could see the silhouette of a single man, General Volkov. He's locked himself in. The glass is bulletproof. We can't get to him before the whole place goes up. Volkov's calm voice echoed from the speakers again, though it sounded tinnier now, more distant. A futile effort, Captain Price. You have my research, but you will not have me, and you will not escape. A pity, O1. We could have accomplished such great things together. Goodbye, my daughter. Lunaria laid their rescued asset gently on the floor near Gaz. I've got him. Go! She looked at the observation room, at the man who had ruined her life and created her. The anger was back, but it was cold now. A focused, perfect point of rage. She looked at Ghost. Glass may be bulletproof, but it's not wolf-proof. She didn't wait for an answer. She took a running start, the wolf surging to the surface one last time. It wasn't a full transformation, but a partial one, a horrifying battle form of human and beast. Her legs elongated, giving her impossible speed. Her arms thickened, claws sprouting from her fingertips. She hit the gantry stairs, taking them 3 at a time, a charging nightmare. She reached the observation room, and without pausing, she leapt. She flew through the air, a missile of flesh and fury, and slammed into the reinforced glass feet first. The glass didn't shatter. It spiderwebbed, a huge network of cracks appearing with a deafening groan. She landed on the gantry, turned, and charged again, slamming her shoulder into the weakened pane. This time, it exploded inwards in a shower of crystalline cubes. She tumbled into the control room, rolling to her feet amidst the debris. General Volkov stood there, his calm facade finally shattered. His face was a mask of shock and, for the first time, fear. He fumbled for a sidearm in his lab coat, but he was too slow. Lunaria was on him, her clawed hand grabbing him by the throat, lifting him off the floor and slamming him against the back wall. His gun clattered to the ground. She stared into the eyes of her creator, her own eyes blazing with amber fire. A savage, triumphant roar tore from her throat. She wanted to kill him. The wolf screamed for it, to rip and tear until there was nothing left. But Simon's voice echoed in her head. Don't let the anger blind you. It's a tool, not a fuel. She held the terrified man, her claws digging into his skin, a war raging inside her. Then Ghost was there. He moved past her, calm and silent in the chaos. He picked up Volkov's pistol from the floor. He looked at Lunaria, his eyes visible through the mask sockets. Let go. It's over. She understood. With a final, contemptuous snarl, she hurled Volkov to the floor at Ghost's feet. The general scrambled backwards, crab-walking away from the monster he'd created, only to bump into the steel-toed boots of the Ghost he hadn't anticipated. Ghost raised the pistol. Volkov looked up, his mouth opening to plead, to bargain, to gloat one last time. He never got the chance. Ghost fired once. The sound was flat, definitive, an ending. He didn't spare the body a second glance. He turned to Lunaria, whose transformation was already fading, leaving her shaking and exhausted. He reached out and gently pulled her away from the scene. "Promise kept. Let's go home." The exfil was a frantic, desperate race against time. The facility was tearing itself apart, explosions rocking the foundation. Price led them through a maze of collapsing corridors, following the emergency exit signs. Soap and gas carried the unconscious asset between them. Lunaria moved on pure adrenaline, Ghost at her side, his hand never leaving her back, a steady guiding force. They burst out of a service tunnel and into the blinding white of the Siberian blizzard just as a massive explosion engulfed the listening post, sending a plume of fire and smoke into the night sky. The shockwave knocked them off their feet. The extraction helicopter was already descending, its searchlight cutting through the snow. They scrambled aboard, the crew chief helping to haul them in. The moment the ramp was up, the chopper banked hard and roared away from the burning ruin. The inside of the helicopter was loud and chaotic, but to Lunaria, it felt like a sanctuary. The mission was over. Volkov was dead. They had his research. And they had her brother. She sank onto a seat, the exhaustion hitting her like a physical blow. The asset was strapped to a stretcher, Soap checking his vitals. Price was on the comms, giving a clipped report to Laswell. Gaz handed her a canteen, his expression a mixture of awe and concern. She drank gratefully. Ghost sat down beside her, his presence a quiet comfort. He reached up and, with a hiss of Velcro and the click of buckles, removed his mask. Simon looked at her, his haunted blue eyes searching her face. He had a new cut on his cheek and his face was smeared with grime, but she'd never seen him look more real. He reached out, not with a gloved hand, but with a bare one. His fingers were calloused and scarred. He gently brushed a stray strand of hair, damp with sweat and melted snow, from her forehead. His touch was warm. It wasn't the touch of a handler or a lieutenant or a ghost. It was Simon's. He didn't say anything. He didn't need to. In his eyes, she saw it all. Pride, relief, understanding. We faced it together. She leaned her head against his shoulder, her eyes fluttering closed. The roar of the helicopter was a lullaby. The cold of Siberia was a distant memory. All she felt was the warmth of his hand, now resting on her shoulder, and the steady, solid presence of her anchor, her alpha, her Simon. The pack was safe. The pack was growing, and for the second time in her life, against all odds, she was home.